The importance of highlights and shadows. We all know that photography is finding different ways to use light. So understanding the use of highlights and shadows is really important to getting good results. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to use highlights and shadows to create gorgeous photos. Hello, my name is Mike Lloyd. I am a professional boudoir photographer in Silicon Valley, California. I've been doing it for 13 years and teaching for 11 years, and I freaking love lighting. It is my favorite. One of the things I'm known for is my dark and dramatic, moody lighting. I absolutely love this style, but there's a ton of other stuff that I can shoot as well, and not everyone likes the dark and moody work. So can you still use highlights and shadows? Absolutely. That's what this video is all about. So whether your shadows or your highlights are super dark or super bright, anywhere in between makes no difference. This video is going to explain how to use the two to take stunning photos. So first, we are going to dive into the histogram. Here we have a histogram. I'm going to be doing most of this video in Photoshop because I get my markup tool. I can pretend to be John Madden here while we do this. So you'll notice the histogram is available on your camera. It's also available here in Photoshop. This little guy right there, a histogram of a histogram. That is very meta. You get one in Photoshop, Camera Raw. Everywhere you look in photography, you can find a histogram. So what is this thing? Well, this shows you how much of each tonal value is present in your photos. So what the heck does that even mean? Well, the histogram is really divided into 5 sections. We have the blacks, we have the shadows, yoink. We have the midtones, we have highlights, come on, there we go, and we have whites. I'm drawing these with my finger on a trackpad, so hence the beautiful penmanship here. So what this shows, the top of the chart right here shows, the max value for one of these. The bottom is 0. This line over here is absolute black, and the threshold over here is absolute white. So what the histogram shows is how much of an image is in the blacks, shadows, mids, highlights, and whites of your histogram. A couple things that this will tell you. Is the image underexposed or overexposed? Or is there a thing called clipping? Now you might be thinking, cool, Mike, this is getting real technical for a video on how to take better photos. Trust me, once you understand the technical stuff first, and it's really not that complicated, everything else gets super simple, but you gotta know the foundations here. So when you look at this graph, again, you have this line over here is absolute black. This line over here is absolute white. There's a concept called dynamic range. So what is dynamic range? It is the value from absolute black to absolute white that something can register. So in your camera, you know how you go outside and you take a photo on a bright sunny day? You can either expose for the things in the sun, and then all the shadows seem to turn black, right? Or you expose for the thing in the shadows, but then maybe your sky turns absolutely white and you can't get any of that detail back. That's because your camera has a dynamic range from black to white. Anything outside of that is white. Anything outside of that range is absolute black. Our eyeballs have a much wider dynamic range than what camera technology has, which is why when we look in the trees on a sunny day, we can see shadows and we can see highlights, but our camera registers one of those as black or one of those as white. It doesn't have the same capabilities as our eyes. That's why this is important, because the way we see the world is not the way our camera sees the world. And in order to master highlights and shadows, you have to start seeing the world the way your camera does, not the way you do. All right, I hope all of that makes sense. You might want to watch this again, rewind that part if you need some help. So when you look at the histogram, again, it tells you what part of the image is exposed for blacks. So when we adjust the blacks in an image slider, like in Camera Raw or in Lightroom, we are really only adjusting this section. The blacks adjust this column. the shadows adjust this column, the mids, the highlights, and the whites. Now, because all of these are connected, as soon as you start to adjust one, it doesn't just boost these, it'll lift the whole side of the histogram. So if we go to adjustments, let's go to curves. Okay, so here in our curves adjustments, you can see the histogram of our histogram. If I want to adjust the shadows, because see, we have a ton of data here in the shadows, I can raise that, but it's also going to raise everything else. You see this curve, how it affects the entire image. I could draw points on there. And then even if I still adjust that, notice the other areas are being adjusted as well. So I may just want to adjust this area here in the shadows, but the blacks and the mids and everything else will be adjusted also. But this is how a histogram works. You adjust all these different areas. Notice there's barely anything in the whites. That's because very little of this image is bright enough to actually be considered white on this histogram. Same thing with the highlights. Very small amount of data in this image is actually considered a highlight. So now that you know that a highlights is data that falls in this column, shadow is data that falls in this column, let's put it to work. So I'm going to show you a handful of different photos that all use highlight and shadow different ways. So in this one, I love using highlights to draw attention to important things. So the boots, they're made for walking. They're also the important part of this photo. And then my subject in the background. I've also done different images where she is just barely visible in the background and the boots are the primary focus because it draws your attention to this element of the story and it adds mystery in the background. Like, what is she looking at over there? Different ways to show importance in an image. You generally want the most important part of the image to be the brightest. That's how our brains read images. Whenever we walk into a room, look into a space, we notice the brightest, the highest contrast, and the sharpest focus. That's how we view images. So in this one, we see here, but she's not the sharpest. The boots are the sharpest, most in focus, and there's a ton of contrast. So by showing highlights here, shadow in the middle, highlights in the back, and then shadows around all of that, we can create depth in the image and show the important things while hiding the things that aren't that important. Oh, the next one. Shadows also show detail because light is directional. Light particles go from an originating source straight out until they hit something, and then they may reflect and bounce off. So when I have my light off to the side and it's aiming straight in, if we have definition in the muscles here, because she's got fantastic abs, those shadows are going to carve out detail. Same reason when you look at the moon, we can see craters on the moon. Same concept right here. Now, because of this, you can see all of the detail of her skin, all the pores. It was kind of chilly, so there's kind of like goosebumps there. You can see all the hairs, fibers. I've also jacked the clarity up in this image a ton, so you can see all of that. Because side lighting like this will show all of this detail, you're also going to see pores and wrinkles and everything else a lot stronger. So you can use it to your advantage to show all this muscle definition in here that she loved. I mean, when somebody works this hard to get a six-pack, you're going to want to light them in a way that shows off those muscles. But mind you, every other part of the image is absolutely going to be influenced by that same kind of lighting. So light and shadow can show texture in your images, including muscle definition. Light also adds direction and flow to your photos. So in this case, for example, you can see I got a light over here and it's headed this direction. It gives us flow, like she's looking this direction as well where the light is coming from. And so your eye sweeps across the image. Another way to add direction to something is here. So I used what's called a cookie to shape the light and made it look like there's a window. So the window light is coming in and landing on my subject here. This is adding direction and flow to the image. When we can visualize the light source, in this case, moonlight coming in through a window, it enhances the story. It gives us more elements to consider the context of the image. Maybe it's a fire or a candle. Maybe it's a flashlight. Maybe someone's holding a lantern, or they're just lamps or lights in a room. Whatever the light source may be. It could be a computer screen. It could be a refrigerator door being open and having the light come out like that. Anytime you can use the light source to add dimension to an image like this, by showing where the light originated and then how it hits the scene, that adds a lot of personality and enhances the storytelling of your image. All right, I'm going to jump ahead a couple. We also use highlight and shadow to create separation. This is probably the most common usage for it, at least in photography and how lighting is taught. So what do I mean by separation? That is separating our subject from the background. So in this case, on my subject here, I have my main light over off to the side. I also put this circular light on the background. That's called a background light. Fancy, right? It's a type of kicker. So a kicker is a light that separates two objects. So in this case, the kicker is the background light. It's the light that I put on the background. However, in this case, the kicker is the rim light. So I just covered it there. You can see the highlight on the hat right here and on her shoulder and arm right here. That highlight creates a definitive line that separates our subject from the background, as opposed to having, the shadow of her body fall into the shadow of the background. See, on this side, we have the highlight from my key light that separates her from the background. Over here, we have the shadow on her, the highlight on the background, right? That's the opposite of the highlight on her, the shadow on the background. And again, shadow doesn't have to mean the dark area over here. If we go back to our histogram, the shadow is just this part of the histogram. It doesn't have to be in the blacks to be considered shadow. It's just the darker side of the midpoint. So creating separation, again, you can alternate highlight, shadow, highlight, shadow. Same over here. Highlight, shadow, highlight, shadow. Now you're probably thinking, Mike, you just assigned the background light here as a highlight and as a shadow. Well, in this gradient, it's brighter over here than it is over here. So on the histogram, this is probably closer to the highlights. This is closer to the shadow. But regardless of where they lie on the histogram, this is brighter, this is darker. There's a border there. Then this is darker and this is brighter. There's a clear transition. This is brighter than this. There is a clear transition. This is brighter than this. There is a clear transition. So alternating those areas of highlight and shadow create separation. All right, in my last image here, using highlight and shadow to entirely change your scene. So in this photo, which I shot in the middle of the day, I didn't want to see the background. I wanted it to look like we shot this at night. So rather than go out and shoot at night, we went out in the middle of the day. And I just set my camera to underexpose the scene to take away all of the background. I didn't want it to look like we were in a park in the woods. I just wanted to see this brick wall. So in the image, I put her on the brick wall and I lit, as you can see here, I have my one strobe that's aiming down. I moved the light over in this one, so it's actually coming from this direction. And you can tell by the look on her face right here how the shadow is on this side and the highlights are over here. But all I wanted to see was her, a little bit of the ground so she's not floating in space, and I wanted this brick wall. And you can see that part of the brick wall right there is this part of the brick wall, and she was just standing right here. So you can use highlight to separate her from an entire world of shadow by underexposing part of your image and using flash to expose the rest of the image and the things that you want to see. So ton of creative ways that you can use highlight and shadow to create separation, to add depth, to hide things you don't want to see, to show texture and layers of things. There's a ton that we can play with. And again, powerful storytelling elements when you can see the source of the light, and that creates depth in the scene also. I've got a ton more lighting videos on this channel, as well as over at boudoirguild.com if you want to take any of the courses over there, where I walk you step by step how to set up all your lights, how to do them, how to know if you've done them wrong, and a ton of different creative ways you can shoot boudoir with fantastic lighting. Not just in my own dark and moody style, but I walk through several different lighting setups that you can do. If you have any questions about this, post them down in the comments. And I think actually the best way to master the use of shadows and highlights is just to, subscribe to the channel. That's probably the best way right there. You are amazing. We'll see you inside.